hear me? Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay. So, hello everyone. Hello again to many of you. My name is Felipe Aburto. I'm an assistant professor at Texas A&M University, the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences. I'm also part of the FiRing project, that is the project that is sponsoring this workshop. The workshop is called Multi-Scale Effects of Extreme Forest Fires. And as I mentioned, is sponsored by the Anillo ACT210060 project, entitled Multi-Scale Effects of Extreme Forest Fires on Erosion, Water, and Biogeochemical Cycles in Natural and Managed Forest Soils. The project has collaborations between national and international universities and aims to investigate the impacts of forest fires on soils and native forest degradation and forest plantations in Chile. On behalf of the team of researchers and collaborators, we thank you for your interest and participation in this workshop. And we invite you to listen and participate on this very interesting presentations we have today. We will continue with the same dynamics that we have followed the previous days. We'll have 20 minutes of presentations, and then we'll have a space for questions at the end of the workshop. And we ask you to please keep your camera off and microphones off when the presenters are presenting, so they don't get distracted. You can ask questions using the chat, or as I mentioned earlier, at the end of the presentations. Our first presenter today is Dr. Claudia Rojas. She's an agriculture engineer, graduated from the Universidad de Chile, and doctor in soil sciences and biogeochemistry from Pennsylvania State University. She's an associate professor at the University of O'Higgins. Her research has an interdisciplinary collaborative approach from microbial ecology and biogeochemistry of soils, understanding the contribution of soil microbial diversity to the dynamics of carbon in the terrestrial ecosystems, the resilience and restoration of forests on contaminated sites in Mediterranean areas, and the adaptation of agroecosystems to the impacts of climate change. Please welcome Claudia. We're very happy to have you. And just to remind you, you have only 20 minutes to present. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Felipe. And thanks everybody for sticking with us to the last day of the workshop. And as you see here in my title, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the resilience of microbial communities and carbon source utilization in forest ecosystems affected by fires here in Chile. So the presentation that I would like to share with you today, here we go, is basically divided in two portions. I would like to share with you what we have learned since 2018, more or less, on the study of phylogenetic diversity, microbial diversity, and carbon source utilization. And also, I would like to talk a little bit about a study that we did in one of the sites that I'm going to be showing you here, where we use different organic amendments to improve some biotic and abiotic properties of soils. So with that, I'm going to start with the first part of the talk that I wanted to share with you. This is an article that has been recently published in Frontiers in Microbiology. So it's an open access journal. You can see the information what I'm going to be showing you today in that article. And mainly the objective that we have there is we wanted to evaluate the state of community level physiological profile by using biolog ecoplates, and also the prokaryote community structure on soil compartments, a rhizosphere, as I'm showing you here, and bulk soils, two different sites affected in the O'Higgins region in central Chile, which is located in the Mediterranean climate zone in Chile. So as I mentioned, the community level physiological profile that we study, we use 31 carbon sources in a biolog ecoplate. And for the phylogenetic study, we did use qPCR and Illumina sequencing of the 16S, particularly the V4 region. So the two sites that we decided to focus on were located, one in Pumanque. Pumanque was one of the sites affected by one of the last mega fire that we had in Chile in 2017. This is located more towards the east front of the coastal mountain, about 100 meters above the sea level, and the mean monthly precipitation is about 36 millimeters, while the Requino site is located toward the Piedmont of the Andes mountain. Is a higher elevation, 1,000 meters above the sea level, and with 25 millimeters of precipitation as an average, monthly average. So here is the way the sites look like. Here I'm going to show you a little bit more about the sites. These two sites in Pumanque, we selected an area of about 0.7 hectares, and this one in Requino is about 1 hectare, and the vegetational composition at the two sites are fairly similar. We do have about 30 herbaceous species in Pumanque and 18 species in Requinoa. 5 of them are common, are the most common at the two sites, and so that is where we base our study. We did use a rhizosphere of herbaceous species, and we do call these two sites as sclerophyllous forest because they are dominated by typical woody and shrub species of that ecosystem. So here in Pumanque, we do have about 22 species of woody species, and here we have about 12 species. And the common ones are actually the typical that we have in this type of ecosystem in the central portion of Chile, which is Quillaja saponaria, Litrea caustica, Peumus boldus, and a shrub which is Treboa trinervis. So at these two sites, we also did some soil characterization, and here in Pumanque we do have an insectisol, which is like sandy loam textures. Is derived by alluvium and colluvium parent material, and it's about 1 meter, 120 centimeters in depth. While in Requino, we do have an alphisol, it's shallower, and is also on the coarse type of textures. So when we take a look at the experimental design that we use at these two sites, you see that we separated in two main areas. The green one are the ones that were not affected by fires, and the red one were affected by fire. They are continuous to each other. So the vegetation that was here before the fire is really similar to what is next to the place affected by fire. And we divided 3 plots by 20 by 20. And in each of these 3 plots, we projected a grid is 5 by 5 meters, and we collected rhizosphere and bulk soil samples from the 3 plots per site and per condition or treatment. I'm going to be calling treatment the burn and unburned site. So I'm spending a little bit of time here because we have had some conversation in the FiRing project on how to deal with the heterogeneity of the site and the sampling strategy. And in my case, I did pull these samples. So I have composite samples per plot, and that is what I'm going to be showing you today. These samples were sampled about 33 months and 17 months after the fire occurrence. So I'm going to be roughly calling them affected about 3 years ago by fires and 1 year ago after the fires when we sampled. So we have most recently fire affected site and a more distantly fire affected site. So when we take a look at the metabolic microbial catabolic activity, which is what we did measure with the average wage color development of these 31 carbon source that we use in the biolog eco plate, and also the diversity index that we use to evaluate this color development that we studied in this community level physiological profile. What we do see that the most distantly affected fire, the Pumanque one, does not show evidence of activity affection after fires. Treatment is fires, and source is the source of the soil, if it's bulk or rhizosphere. So in other words, we are not seeing differences between the burned and unburned soils at Pumanque based on microbial activity. And this is exactly what I'm showing you here in these plot bars, where I do have in the red the burn condition and blue the unburned condition. We are not seeing differences in Pumanque. We do see those differences in Requinoa, the most recently affected fire. So after 1 year of fire occurrence, we still see the effect of these phenomena in activity because of the fire occurrence and also because of the source where we are collecting our samples, rhizosphere or bulk soil sample. One thing that I should point out at the beginning of my talk is that the two sites that I'm showing you here, the fires were considered low severity fires as opposed to previous talks, which have been more related to extreme phenomenon. So just remember that these are low severity fires. So when we take a closer look to these 31 carbon source that we kind of survey in this ecosystem, here in this cluster heat maps to the left, I'm showing you Pumanque, and to the right, I'm showing you Requinoa. And one thing that we can take a look at here is, well, the scale, the blue one is not use of the carbon source, and in yellow one, you see like more use of that carbon source. Sorry. Okay, so first, we do see that there is no clear pattern here in Requinoa. So Requinoa, remember, that is the site that is still showing the legacy of fires in microbial activity and carbon consumption. We do see more clear pattern here in Pumanque, where we do see that the utilization of carbohydrates are more used in these systems. And particularly, I wanted to pay attention to this bar here and this one here, which is asparagine. Asparagine, we do see that carbon source is being used at the two sites regardless of the time that passed after fire. And that asparagine, we can relate it to the release of ammonia in the microbial activity of the enzyme asparaginase. So here we are learning, and we are having some clue that enzymes that are related to the nitrogen cycle are the ones that are responding consistently in the two sites after fire occurrence, particularly in the rhizosphere of these samples. So now, when we move at the more at the DNA-based analysis, remember that we did use Illumina sequencing for the 16S, particularly the B4 region. And we do see that this approach is more sensitive to the occurrence of fire. So remember that for activity, we did see some differences between burned and unburned soils in the most recent affected fire. But here you will see that we are we are seeing that track at the 2 sites. So that tells us something about the microbial redundancy that we can have in our system. So here, let me walk you through this table. We do have here, the first column is the result of qPCR. Then we do have 3 alpha diversity indexes, and then we do have 2 beta diversity analyses that we did. And here, one thing that I wanted to point out is that treatment, that means the occurrence of fire or not, is significantly affecting most of the indexes that we use. The only one which is an exception here is the ASV richness here in the case of Pumanque. But all the other diversity indexes based on DNA approach are being affected by the occurrence of fires. That is not the case for soils according to their compartment, if they were from the rhizosphere or the bulk soil sample. So what we are consistently seeing here, that the rhizosphere versus bulk soil environments that we do know that are really different, they are not playing a major role here in this type of samples. So when we take a look at the beta diversity analysis that we did here in our study, the first 2 panels at the top, I'm showing you A is Pumanque, well, the column here is Pumanque and this one is Requinoa, but the upper ones, I'm showing you here the canonical analysis of principal coordinates. And what we can see here, this upper panel to the left, is that these samples separate according to the fire occurrence, okay? So at the 2 sites, we are seeing like the community of prokaryotes are separating by the fire occurrence. Now, when we take a look at Pumanque, the site that it was more further affected by fires, we also see that there is a difference between the samples that we taking from the rhizosphere and the samples that we are taking from the bulk soil. So they are really distinctive microbial communities. And we are not completely sure that that is happening in Requinoa, which is the most recently affected fires, and probably is because these 2 habitats are not having enough time to kind of differentiate, put them apart and be different from each other. Now, when we take a look only the data from bulk soils, because we did not have enough rhizosphere samples to analyze the chemical properties, we are seeing that dissimilarities in Pumanque communities are mainly due because of pH. We know that pH is one of the main properties that structured microbial communities, and also one of the soil properties that changed the most after fire occurrence, and also nitrate. Nitrate is, as you can see here, is the soil chemical property that is explaining the differentiation of microbial communities at the 2 sites. And then just to wrap up on the first project that I wanted to show you here, when we take a look at the microbial taxonomical assignment, we do see that we were able to identify 24 prokaryote taxes or division. 2 of them were belonging to eukaryotes. And out of that, 18 were affected by fires in Pumanque. I want you to pay attention just to the first column. And 8 were affected by fires. But I want you to pay attention to the ones that consistently change between the 2 sites. There are 2 phyla, Rhocobacteria and Actinobacteria, that are decreasing at the 2 sites, regardless of the time that passed after fire. And Actinobacteria and Rhocobacteria are both acidobacteria. We do know that they respond to the change in pH, and that is something that we did see in our study. So we are trying to understand that the changes in the decrease in acidobacteria because of change in pH. And Rocobacteria is a division that is really interesting in our in soils and particularly in our environment because these are groups that base their metabolic activity. They gain energy from organic compounds, so they respond to the type of organic compounds, organic matter that is present in the soil. That is something that also changed after fires. And two other phyla that are increasing, consistently increasing at the two sites are two phyla, Firmicutes and Actinobacteria, that from the literature we do know that receive a high temperature condition, most of them because they are able to produce spores. So what we are learning here is that we do see a legacy of fires, particularly in the DNA-based approach. And we do see that in spite of all the noise that we have in our system, like differences in temperature, soil condition, land position, we are seeing some consistent biological features that are changing. And those are the ones we are going to be focusing on to understand how microbial resilience is behaving at this system. And we do know that microbial communities are more than prokaryotes, so we are looking at some eukaryotes and also some nitrogen fixers at this site. So just to be on time, I'm gonna try to be really fast here. I wanted to share with you the second article that we have recently published. This is located in Pumanque, the site that was affected in 2018. And we did wanted to understand based on organic amendments which were easily available for local people who manage land there. We asked which of these organic amendments, swine, poultry manure, and compost will result in better improvements in chemical and biological activities at the site. So we did have 5 treatments consisting in swine manure, poultry, compost, only mulch, a control plot that is just burned, and a reference site. So what we did here is to measure some basic biotic activity and indexes. And we do see that basal respiration is increasing always when we do add organic matter to the system, particularly with manure, which are organic matter, which are fresher than compost, the respiration is increased. And in microbial biomass, we don't see like a really like clear increase in microbial biomass, except for the most fresh material, manure. So the message here is that at the fresher material, we are liberating much CO2, and that is, we are also looking at the carbon content. So it's the opposite. The more CO2 we release, the less, of course, carbon is in the soil. And we are looking at here with the carbon content in our site. So just to finish up, we wanted to understand how the soil sample the plot differentiated, and of course the treatment and making a good portion of the differences. And we can see this here in this regression modeling, that we are seeing that the differences in biotic indexes that we studied are most explained by treatment, particularly treatment that are based on carbon. So with that, we did see that swine manure is the one that is improving soil properties like immediately after the application of this amendment, but compost seems to be the amendment that might result in longer positive result in nutritional conditions. And also we are all looking here, we're going to be looking at microbial communities, fungi and prokaryote, as well as the previous work. So with that, I would like to thank all the institutions, funding, and people who make this work possible and enjoyable. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Claudia. We're going to move right away to our next presenter. Stuart, are you there? Stuart? Stu? Okay, I don't see Stu in there. So, Stuart Wilson, are you there? Okay, so in order of time, we're going to move to our third presenter. And if maybe Stu's having some issues with his connection. So, Ekaterina Filmonenko, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
So let me introduce Ekaterina, Dr. Ekaterina Filmonenko. She's a researcher at the University of Tübingen with a PhD from the ex-Bio Institute of Environmental and Agricultural Biology. Her research areas focus on the environment, heavy metals, environmental pollution, heavy metal pollution, and environmental risk assessment. Welcome, Ekaterina. You have 20 minutes to present, and we have questions at the end of the presentation if Dr. Wilson show up later. Okay.
Could you see my screen, my presentation?
Yes. Yes, we can see.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks for the opportunity to take a part in this workshop. And now I present my talk about effects of fire on the soil organic matter stability. This research was carried out in the University of Tübingen as a part of Project Terra Arctic and the Kerberos project. The aim of our research is to determine soil organic matter stability during post-fire regeneration in the forest tundra in Western Siberia. More than 10% of territory Western Siberia was affected by fire at the last 35 years. And study area of our research is located in the north of Western Siberia in Yamal-Nenets region. The climate of this territory is subarctic with annual temperature around -8 degrees and with annual amount of precipitation around of 480 millimeters. To studying effect of fire on soil organic matter stability, we have applied chronosequence approach, and we studied area where wildfire was 0, 2, 3, 4, and more, and also more than 30 years ago. For every studying area, we selected two sampling sites, burn site where fire was, and control unburned area. Soil properties, climate properties, of course, there was a totally similar for this site, and only fire was a changing factor. We collect liter samples, and you can see the thickness of liter for unburned area is much more bigger than the thickness of liter after fire. And also we collect mineral topsoil samples divided by 5 to 10 centimeters up to this around 30 centimeters. And according to sampling, we also provide series of field measurements such as soil respiration measurement by closed chamber technique. And it was found that for post-pyrogenic ecosystem, flux of CO2 is much more reduced in compared with control sites. And also for create model about distribution of heat flow in the Arctic soil, we provide measurement of solar and photosynthetically active and radiation balance. It was needed for predict transform of heat flow under surface transformation, also under fire, and also under warming changes. So some groups of our research team provide multispectral scannings and geobotanical characterization of territory in burned and unburned conditions. To study transformation of soil organic matter under fire, we provide series of laboratory experiments. We study soil organic carbon content and total nitrogen by method of dry combustion. Also, we make incubation experiment to determine microbial respiration. We made this experiment under different temperature to calculate temperature sensitive of soil organic matter decomposition. We used thermal analysis to separate different pools of thermal stability of soil organic matter. We applied thermogravity technique, and also we applied differential scanning calorimetry analysis. We studied content of some trace elements, for example, mercury content in burned and unburned soil samples. For this, we used atomic absorption methods. So, soil organic carbon content in liter horizon is 10 times higher than content in mineral topsoils. And after fire, the content of carbon is reduced up to 40% for liter horizon and also for mineral topsoils. The changes has a similar magnitude for both horizons. And I would like to say that in this slide, in the next slide, green color are used for control, unburned areas, and gray, dark gray or black is used for burnt areas. So total nitrogen in 5 times higher in the liter horizon for control area, but after fire this reduced, and differences between liter and mineral horizon is up to much bigger and up to 8 to 10 times. Decreasing of total nitrogen in liter horizon is around 13%, and for mineral horizon it's much bigger and it's up to 40%. Ratio of carbon to nitrogen is also decreasing after fire. It's so not only because content of nitrogen and carbon decreases in the different proportion, but in mineral soil there is process of leaching when mineral components from burnt ash after burning liter is leaching in the down and stored in mineral topsoils. Water holding capacity is very important parameters of soils, and it's mostly controlled by soil organic carbon. And as the soil organic carbon is lost under the fire, this water capacity is also reduced. And for liter horizon, reducing of water capacity is up to 1.7 times. It's quite strong. So pH is range between 4 units to 6 units, and it's typical for tundra forest soil. Under fire, soil pH in mineral topsoil increasing and shift in the more alkaline reaction. It's so because ash production and also because under fire, organic acid is decomposed. Let me see. Okay. In these graphs, there are present some microbial characteristics of soil, mineral topsoil, and liter horizon. Intensive of microbial respiration in liter horizon is 6-7 times higher than this parameter for mineral topsoils. And under fire, there is any changes, any significant changes for mineral soil, but for liter horizon, the decreasing of microbial respiration is quite strong. And after the shortest time after fire, microfolamic soils, fire makes soil less available for microbial decomposition. It's according to this coefficient, but after next 8 years after fire, the availability of soil organic matter to microbial decomposition is moved back to the unburned value. So, content of microbial carbon in the soil organic carbon pools is decreased in the first years after fire, and as the same as the microbial respiration after 8 and more years is recovery to the unburned value. Temperature sensitive of soil organic matter decomposition is decreased under the fire, and these plots we can see graphs which shows our how change basal respiration due to the temperature in what soil was incubated. And so temperature sensitive is increased up to 0.2 units after fire. The highest increasing of these parameters is the shortest period after fire, and it means that fire makes soil organic matter is more sensitive to the warming. First of thermal analysis of soils and litter samples presented, and we can see clearly separated 3 peaks of studying sampling. On the x-axis presented temperature under which samples are. At the y-axis there are parameters of mass losses of soil sample per every 10 degrees, and it's presented in percent of the total mass losses. And the first peak is related with losses of water, and the second two is related with losses of labile and stable soil organic matter. And we can see differences between magnitude of maximum for labile soil organic matter and its change during the 8 years post-fire regeneration. And with the years after fire, it makes less and less. And the same picture for the mineral topsoils, but it's not so clearly separated just because amount of soil organic matter, as I told, in 10 times less than in the litter horizon. So, fires is actually strongly changed the proportion between labile soil organic matter in the soils under the fire. In the shortest time after fire, we can see the biggest differences between labile soil organic matter pools. But after the next year, the differences get to less and less. And after 8 years after fire, there is not really significant differences between labile soil organic matter between burnt and between control soil. The same situation for stable soil. The biggest differences between stable soil organic matter is there is in the first years after fire, and for the next period, it's much less. Fire effect on the pools of soil organic matter is really strong drop of ratio of soil organic matter, labile pool of soil organic matter to stable in the shortest time. And we can see that this ratio is less than one unit, around 0.85. And after several years, it's come back to the value for the control sites where there is not any fires. So it's known that stability of soil organic matter is really strong, depends on the energy what is needed to combust combustion these soil organic components. And in this graph presented how heat flow from combustion soil organic matter per every milligram of soil, depending on temperature in which samples are. And we can see the really big differences between these parameters for control soils, control liter, and control soils, mineral topsoils, of course, and so liter and mineral soils after fire. According to the maximum of these two peaks, we can say the thermal stability of some stable pools is 1.2 times higher than thermal stability for this more labile pool. And according to the comparing this value of for the control area and burned area, we see that fires leads to the decreased thermal effect, energy effect, and energy for combustion is decreasing for liter in 1.3 times, and decreasing for mineral topsoil is quite bigger and is up to 3.4 times. And as fire effect on soil organic matter pools effect on the soil organic carbon and total nitrogen decreasing, it's also effect on the fate of some trace elements, especially which is closely correlated with soil organic component. This element usually may have volatile mode of occurrence. For example, it could be mercury, arsenicum, stibbium, some radioactive elements. And for this direction of research, for example, by mercury, we studied how the change mercury content in soil under fire, because mercury is very strongly controlled by organic component in soil, and fire leads to break down the chemical bonds between organic component and mercury, and that's why a lot of amount of mercury released in the atmosphere from the soil. And mostly this process appears for the liter horizon, where losses of mercury is up to 35–36%, but in some cases it's possible also for mineral topsoils, where we can find around 24% of mercury is lost after fire from the mineral topsoil. So this presented the main result of our research, and it was found that soil organic carbon, nitrogen, and also water capacity is decreased under the fire, and soil pH transform and get more alkaline, and also fire reduce proportion between labile and stable soil organic matter pools, especially in the first years after the fire. And fire is may really strong effect on the fate of the some volatile chemical elements from the soil. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for your very interesting presentation. We'll jump. I think we have Dr. Stuart Wilson now.
Yeah, how's it going, Felipe? Sorry about that. Pacific time was it's actually 7 a.m. here in California, and the slot said 8. So my apologies.
No. Our apologies, because we probably didn't realize that there was winter saving times just started last week, right? So
that's all right.
Yeah. So okay. So let me just jumping here. I got a little bit off. Okay. So let me introduce Dr. Stuart Wilson. He has a PhD in soil and biogeochemistry, and master in soil biogeochemistry, and a master in geography. and he is grown and viticulture consultant agricultural technology in USDA NRCS government, with collaborating with USDA and NRCS government, and as an academic right now as an assistant professor at California State University. So please help me welcome Dr. Wilson. And Dr. Wilson, you have 20 minutes for your presentation, and questions for all presenters will be at the end. So after your presentation, we'll have questions. So please remember that you can ask questions in the chat, and they will be read at the end of the presentation. Stu.
Okay, thank you, Felipe.
Yes.
So my colleagues and I, so my name is Dr. Wilson, Dr. Stuart Wilson. I'm assistant professor of soil resources at California Polytechnic State University, and I'm a soil and geospatial scientist. So my colleagues and I are trying to get a better understanding of the spatial extent of wildfires' effects to soils, right? So this idea of soil burn severity and what the spatial extent of wildfires' effects to soils are. All right, so the American West is on fire, right? California, Colorado, all the American West. Welcome to the pyro scene, right? This idea that this combustion of fossil fuels is leading to this increase in temperatures, leading to the combustion, shorter fire seasons, and this combustion of forests across the world, really, and definitely across the American West. So what we know is the frequency of fires are increasing. We know that the area affected by these catastrophic wildfires is increasing. We know that the intensity of these fires is increasing. And a lot of this is due to a shortening of the fire season. So here in California, we used to have a fire season from maybe May to November, but really the fire season is year round now. And a lot of this is due to earlier and earlier spring, and an earlier spring, and a shorter or longer and longer fire season. Okay, but what we don't know is the spatial extent of megafires' effects to soils, right? We've got fire spread itself is heterogeneous, right? We know, that, of course, that soils are heterogeneous, but we don't have a good understanding of the spatial extent of megafires' effect on soils, right? We've got fire spread is heterogeneous. It's basically a heterogeneous pulse or a heterogeneous disturbance across a heterogeneous substrate. And so what my colleagues and I are working on is, can we integrate digital soil mapping or predictive soil mapping along with predictive fire mapping to build better maps of the degree of thermal damage to soils? So we'll talk a little bit about how we use these maps in the United States. So we use these soil burn severity maps for lots of different hazard planning and things like that. But I wanted to take a little digression to talk a little bit about fire as a soil forming factor. So this was not in my original talk, but I threw it in last night. So one of the assumptions that my group is working on is, if we think of the score-pan factors, right? The CLORPT factors of soil formation, climate, organisms, relief, parent material, time, or the McBratney score-pan factors, right? We're assuming that we can have these remotely sensed proxies for the soil forming factors and use those remotely sensed proxies to predict soil properties across the landscape, right? But what if we include fire? Right? I'm not going to sit here and say that I think fire is a soil forming factor. It's more of a pulse disturbance, right? You know, across geologic or pedologic timescales, you know, is there a signature of fire? We could have that discussion, right? But from a mapping perspective, what my group is asking is, if we add remotely sensed proxies for fire, along with the other digital soil mapping covariates, can we do a better job of predicting soil properties in post-fire landscapes? Right, so it's this idea of CLORPT plus fire, or score-pan plus fire. So the idea then is to take our regular score-pan digital soil mapping, remotely sensed proxies for the soil forming factors, and then add rasters of covariates relating to soil burn severity, or rather vegetation burn severity intensity. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there before I talk a little bit more details about this particular project, but generally that's what we're working on. Can you use fire as a soil forming factor, or can you use remotely sensed proxies for fire to help predict soil properties in post-fire landscapes? All right, back to the actual question at hand. We're looking at the effect of physical properties, right? So most of the concern that we have in our large post-fire landscapes is the effect of burn severity on soil physical properties, right? So you lose the cover, you potentially have a hydrophobic layer, you have destruction of soil aggregates, and that leads to these catastrophic landslides. Right. So what we're trying to predict is the degree of thermal damage to soils, right? These catastrophic landslides, right, lead to lots of damage. Here in California, we had a debris flow in Santa Barbara, California, that killed 23 people and caused billions of US dollars in damage, right? There's a lot of little damages too, like little creeks that wash out roads, little bridges that get washed out, that we're also concerned, along with these catastrophic debris flows, right? So soils significantly affect the physical properties of soils, or fire significantly affects the physical properties of soils that leads to these catastrophic debris flows. Right, and this is due to the degree of burn severity, right? So here we have our significantly burned ash layer and significantly altered soil and relatively unaltered soil. So in California and the US, we build maps of soil burn severity. And what these are categorical maps of 4 classes: high, medium, low, and unburned soil burn severity, and trying to categorize the degree of thermal alteration of soils. So we have teams post-fire that go out and collect these field observations of burn severity. And then they use that to then validate that DNBR map, right? So post-fire greenness and pre-fire greenness, subtract the two, you get an estimate of vegetation burn severity. But there can be a disconnect between the vegetation burn severity you get from the DNBR map and the actual soil burn severity. So the way that these groups do it in the United States is they take these field observations, and then they use those field observations to just adjust the bins or adjust the breaks on the DNBR map to then create a soil burn severity map. So the field observations themselves, right, they'll collect hundreds of field observations after a large fire. The field observations themselves don't go to drive a predictive map. So what we're trying to do is use those field observations that the U.S. Forest Service, here in California, the California Department of Fire, goes out and collects these field observations of soil burn severity. They put them in a categorical class, high, medium, and low burn severity, and then use that to adjust that DNBR map, adjust the breaks, right? It's a cartographic approach, just adjusting the bins on that DNBR map. So what we're trying to do is use those point observations to then drive a spatial predictive model, right? Including vegetation burn severity, topographic factors, et cetera. So our site, our study site is the Creek Fire in the central Sierra Nevada of California. So this Creek Fire burned around more than 150,000 hectares. At the time, it was the largest fire in California history. In 2020, it's the 5th largest, right? So we've got more and more of these catastrophic megafires. And there was 172 field observations of that categorical burn severity, high, medium, and low. So just a traditional classical digital soil mapping technique. We take those 172 field observations, we intersect them with raster covariates for the soil forming factors plus fire. We just did a simple random forest with 3x10-fold cross-validation. We don't need to worry about the predictors that much. Basically, everything, it's the kitchen sink approach to digital soil mapping. Lots of terrain variables, some fuels models, some fire fuels models, and then some rasters that are proxies for fire effects. So DNBR, normalized burn ratio, thermal, et cetera. All right, now how are our predictions? They weren't as good as I thought, right? So we ended up correctly classifying the degree of thermal damage to soils, or that soil burn severity. We correctly classified that soil burn severity around 46% of the time. So looking at the confusion matrix, remember we had these 4 classes, right? The Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, its other 8 U.S. agencies, federal government agencies go out and collect these points, and then we are ingesting those points and feeding them to a model. And those points are classified as unburned, low, moderate, and high. So you can see we predict unburned about 40% of the time. Moderate, we did poorly, only predicted accurately in cross-validation 35% of the time. And we predicted high burn severity around 60% of the time. So we did a little bit of a better job with high burn severity. These are our predictors. I would have thought that the terrain attributes would be higher. So this relative importance, the Forest Service burn severity or DNBR maps were high. Lots of the burn rasters for vegetation burn severity. So the fire effects rasters, a lot of those were high, but slope, surprisingly, and the other terrain attributes like TWI and stuff were relatively low. So this is our predictive map of soil burn severity. Red is high. This is in California, Sierra Nevada. Red is high burn severity. Orange is moderate. That's sort of light green is low, and forest green is unburned. So we've got, this is around 150,000 hectares. So, but what we're really trying to do is build a better mousetrap, right? So the way that we do it in the US now is relatively simplistic, really just using field observations to adjust the breaks of a remotely sensed map, right? So what I'm trying to do is compare this to the established technique, right? So the way that the US Forest Service does it now, can we do it better? Can we build what we say in the US, build a better mousetrap, like so make something that is functionally better than what already exists. So this is our predictive map, and this is the existing US Forest Service map. So you can see that we have a greater extent of high severity relative to the US Forest Service map. So this is our predicted map from Random Forest. This is the established technique, which is a cartographic technique. All right, so how can we compare apples to apples, right? We can't do a cross-validation score with their technique, with the Forest Service technique, because that technique is essentially a cartographic technique, right? It's not a model. So what I did was I took their field observations and intersected those with their final map to see how accurate their map was, right? So every time they make a field observation of high burn severity, how often is that sitting in a pixel in their final map of high burn severity, right? So how many times is there pixel agreement between the field observation and the pixel? So in their established technique, they really, really underestimate high burn severity across these maps. Now, if I take that full model, not a cross-validation score, but I take that model of soil burn severity that we created with Random Forest, I fit it to the whole data set and I make predictions, so overfitting it. And I make those predictions. What's our accuracy, right? So acknowledging that this is an overfit map, right? But if we take those field observations of soil burn severity, we take the full data set and fit the model, and we make predictions. How often are our predicted pixels sitting in field observations with the same with agreement between the pixel and the field observation? So this is overfitting, right? But it's the only way I can compare it against the established technique, right? In that case, a lot of these are islands of pixels, right? Where there's a field observation of low burn severity, and around it is an island of pixels of low burn severity. But we get basically 100% agreement if we fit the model to the full data set, predict out across those 150,000 acres or hectares, excuse me. So again, we're trying to compare the established technique with our predictive technique. So if we look at the pixels in each class from the established technique, which is a cartographic technique, we've got really underestimating the high burn severity pixels. If you look at the predicted technique, we have a much higher or much larger amount of pixels in high burn severity classes. So let's look at the field observations. So this is the distribution of field observations, right? around 45 of low, around 50 or so moderate, around 50 or so high severity. So these are the field observations. So now I want to look at the agreement of the field observations with the predicted classes. So if we compare the field observations with the hectares in each class from the established technique, you can see there's many, many more field observations in the high burn severity class relative to the number of pixels or the spatial extent in that high severity grouping in the final map. We compare that to ours, we have better agreement in the predicted map between the field observations and the predicted, the number of hectares in each predicted class. So our cross-validation accuracy was not as great as I would have liked, around 45%. But if we overfit the model and make the full map prediction, the reason I'm doing this is simply to compare to the established technique, right? Then we have 98% agreement of the field observations with the predictions. And why does this matter, right? Why is this important? Is we use these observations of soil burn severity, these classes of soil burn severity, these maps of soil burn severity, right? We use them to make these estimates of the degree of thermal damage to soil and the risk of catastrophic debris flow. And then scientifically, I was just at Soil Science Society of America meeting last week. All of these inferences around the degree of damage to soils, we say X amount of hectares in this class, X amount of hectares in that class, and therefore we have these changes to water quality, soil properties, et cetera, right? But if there's different amounts of area in different classes, depending on the mapping technique, it's going to change your interpretation of effects to soil properties, of the risk of catastrophic debris flows, all these different things that are tied to that estimate of soil burn severity. So I'll leave you with this. What we found, right, we had 90 more square kilometers in moderate or high burn severity using the predictive technique versus the established DNVR technique, right? So this means globally or locally in the American West or globally, there could be much more, there are much greater amounts of catastrophic wildfire, much greater amounts of high and moderate burn severity effects across the world. So our understanding of the spatial effects of fire to soils could be more, there could be much greater high and moderate burn severity than we're taking into account currently. So thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. If anyone's interested in collaborating or working together or anything like that, I'm all ears. I love working with people. So I could put my email in the chat. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Stuart. We are gonna move now to the section of questions and discussion. So this is when it gets entertaining, right? And so we're I'm gonna go to the chat here, but before moving into the chat questions, I want to give the opportunity of anyone here on the audience to ask a question. If you have a question, just raise your hand. So I have 3 speakers here already on camera. So if there's any question you would like to ask in person, you can go ahead and raise your hand now. If not, I'm going to move directly to the questions in the chat. So we're going to start with the first question to Claudia. Francisco Matus says, thank you, Claudia, for this nice study. I was wondering if I understood well for the first study, you have less nitrate against a high pH. I expect the opposite, high pH and high content of nitrate. Maybe I'm wrong. That's the question.
Yes, I just was putting some slides here. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I'm showing you here the most parsimonious model that explain the microbial community structure. And with that, the 2 abiotic properties are nitrate and pH. But here, I didn't show you before, this is the content, the actual content. So in Pumanque, you can see that the pH increased in burn soils, but it's not significant. The same thing happened in Requinoa. That's something that we will expect after fires, that the pH increase. So that happened in the two sides, but not at significant levels. But we do see opposite nitrate content. In Pumanque, we do see that in burn soil, it decreased, and in Requinoa, it increased. So we can have a longer discussion, Francisco, because that is something that we highly believe that is related to the carbon source consumption and microbial activity that I showed before. So that is something that we can talk later, because we don't have time here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Another question for Claudia. Thank you very much for the exciting research. I have a question. There could be a recommendation of 1 or 2 soil assessments that will be an indicator to understand soil recovery in Mediterranean areas. Question is from Francisco. Francisco, would you like to ask that question directly? I don't know if you understand the question, Claudia, but
Francisco.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, go ahead.
Francisco, if I'm mistaken, Francisco may tell me that after this meeting. But in Mediterranean climate, across the globe, the projection in aridity are being really serious. So I think, as we have discussed in the previous days, I think we do need to take that into consideration, because the question is what we are going to be understand by recovery. What are we recovering in the ecosystem? At the end of the day, we want to understand, we want to recover the function of that ecosystem, function above ground and below ground, after a fire occurrence in this aridity context that I'm mentioning. So there is no one index that we can use because soil, we know, is more complex than that. But I will argue that indexes that tell us about processes, about function, more than static elements, could be informative. And also some indexes that incorporate many more conditions in soil, like, for example, soil respiration, which will be related to microbial activity, carbon dynamics, nutritional conditions. I think I will argue that we should be looking at something like that. More processes, more function.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm going to try to mix and match a little bit. So, Katarina, thank you very much. I will ask if there could be an effect on clay minerals of burned soils that can be determined the results of your thermogravimetry. Any comment on that?
Okay. Yes, clay mineral could be studied by thermogrametry, but for this, more high temperature is needed. We studied our samples only between temperature from 30 degrees to 600 degrees, no more. But for study clay mineral, more high temperature is needed, around 800 and more temperature. So that's why in our experiment, we don't have any information and for clay mineral.
Thank you, Katarina. Okay, so I'm moving. Stuart, thank you for this excellent presentation. Have you considering the intensity fire map with the fire severity map prediction for some kind of correlation?
Yeah, so I don't know the intensity fire map. I'm not sure I've come across that explicitly, but I'd be interested to hear more about that. But one thing that we're working on developing is a residence time raster, right? So a way to predict, to include the fire residence time. So if you think of the degree of thermal damage to soil is going to be related to the temperature, right? The intensity, and then the duration, right? So it's the old analogy. If you've got a log burning for a long time, maybe you will get those clay minerals changing right under that burned log, because there's a contact for a long time in that underneath that smoldering log, right? So one of the things we're trying to create a new raster for is that duration, right? Or that residence time. How long is the fire in a pixel, right? So not just how hot it is, but how long is a fire in a pixel to help us predict soil properties.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I mean, and if you have any ideas, I don't know who asked the question, send me an email if you know of some raster predictors that I didn't include. Please send them to me, because I'm trying to figure out again how to build a better mousetrap, right? How we can do this better, and I'm happy to collaborate with anybody that wants to collaborate.
Yes, I'm Francisco Matus from Universidad de la Frontera.
Ah, Francisco.
So, Claudia. Very enriching presentations, as Ignacio. I think your finding of asparaginase is very relevant, because in addition that the product of this reaction is ammonium, another product is L-aspartame, which is an easy source of amino acids for microorganisms that do not have aggressive proteins. I don't know how to say that, to recruit nitrogen. It is probably a pathway that initiates the availability of minimal nutrients for microorganisms that are more demanding.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment, and it's actually it's really linked with what Francisco asked at the beginning, and what I think is the route that we're going to be taking to explain that differences in nitrate and ammonium content at the two sites. Because we not only see that there might be some microbial explanation for that, also we don't see that we are going to have more lixiviation in our aridity context. So this is something that Ignacio, we definitely are going to be looking at the FiRing project, because I think asparaginase is something that is going to give us some more clues on nitrogen cycle.
Thank you, Claudia. Let me see which one I have not asked. Katarina, very nice presentation. I was wondering, I did expect the recovery of labeled carbon after 8 years after fire, but I did not expect such a decrease of stable soil organic carbon or matter. Do you have some comment on it?
Yes, the recovery process in tundra ecosystem is not so fast as the ecosystem here. It takes much more time, but stable soil organic matter pool contains mainly char, and that's why it could be like this, as we found. I guess yes, but we need to more think about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. Carlos, Dr. Stuart Wilson, thank you for your presentation. Have you evaluated the possibility of also integrating the term intensity in some, oh, where? I already asked that one, or not? No, also integrated the term intensity in some way, since severity and intensity are two different concepts. No, I did not ask that one.
I would have, it's pretty much going to be the same answer though, Felipe, so you can, that I haven't included the intensity, but the idea what we're trying to get to is, can we predict or can we include a residence time to try and account for that disconnect between intensity and severity. But more explicitly, we're looking at the burn severity exclusively on the soil. And one of the points of the research is that could be this disconnect between the vegetation effects and the soil effects. And most of what we get from remote sensing comes from the vegetation effects. And so how do we validate that with what potentially there can be either higher soil burn severity. If you get a crown fire that rips through, you can get low burn severity, or if you get a smoldering ground fire, you can get higher soil severity. So there can be a disconnect between vegetation and soil.
So since I kind of asked that question, I will ask another one. Luis Olivares says, hi, Stuart. Very nice and interesting talk about GIS and fire severity. I would like to ask you if you can talk a little bit more about the burning index Is it different? It's for soil with remains of organic horizons, I imagine. Up to which depth do you evaluate it, or they evaluate?
Yeah. So the way this works is this is an existing thing that the U.S. federal government does after wildfire. So they go out there and take these really quick, like a cat hole. They just look. They're going to look at the ash. How deep is the ash? Are the aggregates intact or have the aggregates collapsed? And then they'll do maybe just a dropper test to look at hydrophobicity, right? So it's really, these are a really rapid post-fire assessment. And the reason, and this kind of speaks to Efren's question also, which is it's a really just rapid post-fire assessment that these crews go out because they're trying to estimate, because right in California, the fires pretty much stop when the rain starts. And if there's these huge rainfall events, then you're going to get all these catastrophic debris flows, right? Which can be really, really significant. So it's this post-fire, they go out immediately after fire, sometimes when the fire is still burning, and try and get an understanding of that soil burn severity. So what they do is they just dig a quick little hole. What's the thickness of the ash? Is the ash white or black? Are the aggregates intact? Are they collapsed? Is it hydrophobic? Maybe a couple other quick estimates. And so it's not, this is a totally opportunistic sampling design, right? It's where you can get access after a fire. There was no, I've got another project where we've done some spatial random stratified sampling, looking at fire effects and that relationship between remote sensing and fire effects to soils. But this project, totally opportunistic sampling. These crews go in right after a fire and just try and collect as many points as they can to try and understand how bad was this fire and where do we need to intervene to potentially prevent these catastrophic landslides. So, and as far as the organic horizon, the implication with this high severity is you get complete combustion of the O horizon.
Thank you. So, we have another question for Katerina. Alexis Demov asks, are swamping processes observed in the areas after the fire in the first years? We cannot hear you. Your mic. Okay.
Yeah, this process is it is, and the reason of this, not the heat from the fire. The main reason why these strong processes there are that thicknesses of litter horizon is extremely decreased after fire, and there is not any protection from the solar heat, and that's why the depth of the active layer, where there is not ice, it's much closer, and that's why a lot of water there are, and this process could be, but mostly because of changes in thickness of the litter. Yes.
Thank you, Katerina. I think I've asked all the questions. Yes. Is there any other questions from the audience? You can raise your hand. Okay, if not, I have one question for Claudia. Oh, wait, we have a question in the chat. But I have one question for Claudia. What about total nitrogen on the burn and unburned areas? Did you make any ratio between nitrate and total nitrogen and ammonium and total nitrogen?
For that article that I presented, we did not do that, and we are starting to do it with the new data that we are collecting because of what we're seeing in the previous data, this contradiction between the sites.
Okay. And Stu, I have a question for you as well. So have you considered trying to match your predictions of high severity with the occurrence of these catastrophic events? Have you tried to do anything like that? If your maps are able to predict better what the occurrence of this catastrophic, or where these catastrophic events occur?
Let me make sure I understand the question. Is the idea, can you use these maps to look at areas where it hasn't burned yet and make some understanding of if there will be one, or
No, my question is where these things already happened. So if you use your map from the 2017, areas that were burned, and then match it with the sites where these catastrophic events have happened, and then see if your map predicts better than the current maps.
Yeah, so that's actually something we're working on right now. So the idea, so there's these debris flow hazard models, right, that the USGS has, and there's only a couple inputs. Really, it's the soil burn severity maps and then a rainfall intensity, right, and a couple other things. And so, yeah, we're going to push these through these debris flow hazard maps and see if the sediment delivery, like the in-stream sediment delivery, changes, right? We assume it will. But we haven't actually pushed them through those models yet. But yeah, that's the next step, is to push these maps into the debris flow hazard models and see if the estimates of sediment loads, are increased or are different between the established technique and our predictions.
Yeah, that will be very exciting to see. The next question I have is a question for Stuart. It's about the digital soil mapping on water repellency interest. Are you working with particular fire regime, or is more oriented to evaluate individual plus fire effects?
Yeah, so as far as the water repellency, the degree of hydrophobicity, infiltration, we haven't been able to really. So we went out there with a mini disc infiltrometer and took some infiltration measurements. There's also, they collect some just basic, is it hydrophobic or not? The infiltration rates are really all over they're really difficult to predict at these spatial scales, right? Even when you're in the field, you take the infiltrometer, you put it here, you get one, or you put it over here, you get a different. Even if you take the average of 3 locations right in that pixel, you get a lot of different numbers. And so we have not been able to find any good correlation between environmental predictors and infiltration from a mini disc infiltrometer, at least. And then the other question is, right now, this is new research, and right now we're just focusing on can we predict well for a single fire. Ultimately, we're going to try and take multiple fires, thousands of points, and try and build a map or try and build a model that could predict at other locations. So I think that answers your question, Luis.
Yeah. Thank you, Stu. And last question is for Carolina. Thank you for your presentation. Carla asked, the effects of the fire you presented at different times, how severe or intense were they?
We have studied wildfire, natural fire, so we don't control intense or temperature in the time of the fire. So it's just have study areas after fire, and by this program we have known the time where it was. So I don't have any information about the exactly intense of this, but it could be similar between these different plots because the ecosystem is mostly similar, and the reason of the fire is also mostly the same.
So are these, I'm going to follow up on that because tundra systems are very different, right? So are these fires generally like low, fast fires, or they're like slow, kind of dragging fires? How do they advance very fast and burn very fast, or they tend to stay for long periods?
Mostly the fire is very fast.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of dry mosses, and just one fire pieces is enough to make a really big fire in this ecosystem, in tundra ecosystem.
Okay. Thank you. So I don't know if the speakers have any comments before we close this. Any final comments? Okay, good. So I'm going to pass the mic to Francisco Matos, who is the director of the FiRing project, and he want to give some final words before we close this session and workshop. Francisco.
Thank you, Felipe. So, dear colleagues and attendances to this workshop, We have delighted 3 days with excellent presentation at the first international workshop, Multi-Scale Effect of Extreme Forest Fire, studies within the framework of FiRing project, which is support for Chilean funding. Thank you very much. I would like to thank those who organized this workshop, Dr. Carolina Merino, Dr. Felipe Aburto, who has been chairing this session, and collaborator, Dr. Claudia Rojas, Dr. Ignacio Jofre. Also, I would like to ask thanks to Javiera Ormazábal, who has been organizing this. Thanks a lot, very well done. I especially thanks to our speaker, from which we learn interesting practical and theoretical approaches, such as the role of biocrust in the recovery of fires affected ecosystem, or the impact of fire on prescribed fire to equilibrate benefit against damage and social policies. Our expectations were fulfilled, since now we have the opportunity to enhance our collaboration with our distinguished speakers. I would like to thank all the participants who were interested in this important and hot topic. Finally, I would like to invite you for the second international workshop we expect to do on 2023, where we expect also to advance our project result. Thank you very much to all. Thank you, Felipe.
Thank you very much, Francisco. With this, we conclude this workshop. We appreciate your presence here today. We really thank all our 3 wonderful speakers, Claudia, Caterina, and Stu. Thank you very much, and everyone in the organization. So have a great day and stay tuned. Bye-bye.
Thank you.